Well, Mr. Vajpayee was generally a very, socially he was, what should I say, he was not a social butterfly, he was the opposite, he was a very silent person. In 70 years of independence, if the army was mobilized once completely, the entire army, it was under Mr. Vajpayee against the Pakistanis. The way he handled the Kargil thing, he was very, very clear, Pakistan is the aggressor, we shall not compromise. In 71, we had the midterm polls, and Mr. Vajpayee had come to Ranchi, where I lived then, and he gave a speech. And I went to listen to him as a 14-year-old. And I was mesmerized by what he said, not just by how he spoke, but even by the fact that he was raising very serious issues. Little did I know that 10 years later on I would come to know him and slowly start working with him. Because Mr. Vajpayee was generally a very, socially he was, what should I say, he was not a social butterfly, he was the opposite, he was a very silent person. Actually, almost shy to that extent, till you got to know him. He was very shy. He was not a backslapping kind of a person and, Avji and sit down and this and that.
You might have come across Advani ji a few times in your years with Vajpayee ji, and you've met him, you must have interacted with him. Yes. But what, according to you, made Vajpayee the preferred choice as the prime ministerial candidate for the allies of the Bharatiya Janata Party?
People don't realize today, Mr. Advani's popularity as a national leader is only from the mid-80s, 1980s. Till then he was not. For the party was very important, but publicly he was not. Vajpayee was the face of the Jan Sangh for a long time and then the BJP. So in that sense, Vajpayee had a much larger following or acceptance across the country. Mr. Advani was more a Sangathan person, a person who ran the organization in and out, and he really built it up. But it was required Mr. Vajpayee to then go beyond the party. You cannot win an election only on the basis of your committed voters. You need the uncommitted voters to come across also. Of course, there were differences between what Mr. Vajpayee was trying to do and what many very, very old Swayam Sevaks of the RSS, people like Dattopat Thengde ji who built up the labour movement, people, the Swadeshi Jagran Manch. But I think if you look at Vajpayee's whole attitude towards governance, towards politics, you can see the very strong impact of his days in the Sangh. And the fact his worldview was very much affected by the fact that he was from the RSS himself, And Mr. Vajpayee also over his political career, if you notice, had made changes in his thinking. So I think the relationship was a dynamic one. There were differences, but there were large areas of overlap where they were absolutely on the same page.
You have seen Vajpayee ji on the day of the Pokhran tests. You were in the room, as you mentioned in the book. What do you think was going on in his mind?
I think, going nuclear, especially after the Chinese blast of 1964 and the coming into effect of the Non-Proliferation Treaty in 1967, going nuclear for Mr. Vajpayee was an imperative. India had to go nuclear to be safe. And in that room that day, there was electric tension in the room. There was nervousness, supposing things go wrong. You look like a fool. What would be the impact? These are very momentous decisions. So it was, let me say, nervous excitement among others. But I think for Mr. Vajpayee, and I remember him, and when we wrote out the piece of one-line sentence literally, and then he spoke to it in the lawns of 7 West Coast Road to the press, it was that vindication of a belief. This is what I set out to do, and I have done it.
Today, at 15:45 hours, India conducted 3 underground nuclear tests in the Pokhran range.
Do you think he was prepared for the severe international backlash that came up?
They were prepared for backlash, but I guess not that severe. The fact that for the next 6 months we were an international pariah, absolutely, and the kind of language used against us. BJP and Mr. Vajpayee always wanted Article 370 to go. It was there in every manifesto of the BJP. The 370 would go. And he says, because we do not have the numbers. He never once said that he wanted 370 to continue. He says, Shyam Prasad Mukherjee told me, Vajpayee, now you go back and continue it. The fact that for him also, the complete integration of Kashmir into the Union was an article of faith. As he said, I do not have the numbers to do it. So I think people see distinctions happening. I don't think the distinctions were that sharp. When the Parliament House was attacked in December 2001, Vajpayee ordered a complete mobilization of the Indian Army. So in 70 years of independence, if the army was mobilized once completely, the entire army, it was under Mr. Vajpayee against the Pakistanis. We forget that also. But Vajpayee also felt that, one, India was much weaker. India needed international support, India needed the American support, etc. That these are neighbors, you have to handle them somehow. So I think it was a nuanced approach. Mr. Modi also tried. People invited Nawaz Sharif for his swearing in. What was happened after that? You had Pathankot, you had the army cantonment in Uri, much later you had Pulwama.
Is there a moment with Mr. Vajpayee that you would describe where you felt proud working for somebody like him?
No, many occasions. I think the nuclear thing was one of them. The way he handled the Kargil thing. He was very clear, Pakistan is the aggressor, we shall not compromise. Lots of pressure on him, agree to a ceasefire. He says no, we will agree to a ceasefire only after the Pakistani army withdraws from across the LOC. I think that was a turning point in India's position in the international world order, was a recognition that India is a different country from Pakistan and the challenges India faces from Pakistan have to be handled differently. So I think I would put that as the India of old and the India of new, which is why my book is called The Years That Changed India. It's a different India, a confident India, an India who could stand up to the world powers and talk to them as an equal and not as a supplicant.